Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the channel. My name is CT. Today's video, we are going to do my first tier list. We're going to start with the Michael Jackson tier list. Now, with everything that happened in Michael Jackson's life, I know I'm probably not going to be talking about the music as much in this, but, you know, there's so much you guys are going to yell at me about Michael Jackson, how whether he did it, whether he didn't do it, that all doesn't really matter right now. Because right now we're just focusing on a tier list for his mainstream albums. A little bit of a disclaimer out there: I didn't add a ton of his albums pre Off the Wall, like Forever Michael, stuff like that, because they weren't really like incredible, and they would have probably gone in the F tier by itself. So the only one I did before that was pre Off the Wall was the album Ben, which I will start off with. So Ben, it was Michael Jackson's first solo number one hit, the self-titled starting track, Ben. The rest of the album itself is, kiddish Michael Jackson, just sounding like he did on the Jackson 5 and even the Jacksons later on down the road, and was still with the Jacksons at the time. So Ben is a decent album, but it's not really like incredible, I guess. It's not like a game-changing album, I guess. Like, it's not an album that you necessarily think of when you think of Michael Jackson. So for now, I'm just going to put it in the D category for now. I know a lot of you will probably disagree with me, but that's my opinion. Next up is the 1979 album Off the Wall, which is Michael's first album with Quincy Jones after they met for the 1978 movie The Wiz. This album is pretty solid, not gonna lie. Off the top of the album, the first two tracks, Don't Stop Till You Get Enough and Rock With You, were both number one hits at the time. And then there were other hits on there, such as the self-titled track, Off the Wall, and She's Out of My Life, which are both really, really good songs. This album is also infamous from being the last album during the disco era, and you can definitely hear so much disco in this that you could see why it could be considered a disco album. But nevertheless, this album it's actually pretty good and still one of my favorites to this day. So I'm going to put it in A tier for now. So next up is, of course, the number one album that has ever been released, the 1982 album, Thriller. Now, I'm sure all of you all know Thriller. I mean, it's the best-selling album of all time, obviously. 7 of the 9 tracks on it were top 10 hits. 3 number one hits, including Billie Jean, Beat It, and Thriller. This album basically ruled the early 80s, helped start the music video industry, won 8 Grammys at the 1984 Grammy Awards, and really solidified Michael Jackson as, or incredible entertainer, I should say, in the music industry. Now outside of the 3 number one hits, there were also a ton of tracks pretty much throughout the entire album. I mean, you started off with "Wanna Be Starting Something," the 6-minute top 10 hit, which still had that chant "Seiyama Sama Makusa," and then you had songs, like "Human Nature" and "PYT," Pretty Young Thing, which were both pretty solid. They never made it to number one, but they did make it to the top 10 eventually. And then, of course, you had "The Girl Was Mine" with Paul McCartney, and that really started the Michael Jackson-Paul McCartney friendship, where Paul McCartney came in and did a song for Thriller, and then Michael Jackson helped Paul McCartney on a song called Say, Say, Say for Paul McCartney's Pipes of Peace album that was released in 1985. This album is a no-brainer. This obviously is going in the S tier. In terms of Michael Jackson albums, that is like one of the best of the best. Well, actually, of all time, is the best-selling album, obviously, but still one of the best albums of all time. Next up, we have the 1987 album Bad. Now, this album was released 5 years after Thriller, and this album is kind of underrated in my opinion. While Thriller had 7 of its 9 tracks on the top 10 of the Billboard Hot 100, Bad had 7 number one hits. Michael Jackson holds the record for the most number one hits on an album with 7. tied with Katy Perry's Teenage Dream, which came out in 2012, like 3 years after his death. And, you had the self-titled track Bad, which obviously was the number one. You had The Way You Make Me Feel. You had Smooth Criminal, with probably one of the most amazing music videos you'll ever see. It was like, if you watch the whole thing, it's all in all like a 30-minute short video. You had songs such as Dirty Diana, which really showed Michael Jackson crossing over to more rock. You had Leave Me Alone, which describes Michael's personal life a lot more. So you had a lot of variety on this album. This may seem way too risky, but I'm putting Bad in the S tier. Just because this album, while it didn't receive as much like popularity as Thriller, it still like got a ton of sales. It still had so many number one hits. It had the highest grossing tour of all time, the Bad Tour, in 87 and 88. And yeah, going in S tier. So next up is the 1991 album Dangerous. This album is in the middle for me. Like this album was good for a while and then was overshadowed with all of the 1993 controversies against Michael Jackson. So this album definitely had some number one hits. You had the number one song, Black or White, which still has another amazing music video, as Michael Jackson did throughout of all of these. You had the song Jam and Heal the World, which were both played at the 1993 Super Bowl that he played in, which really changed Super Bowl performances for years to come. And then you had songs like Remember the Time, which the music video for that became the greatest music video of the 90s. This album is good, like, in terms of the music on it, but, like, I feel like it's not an S tier, I'll tell you guys that. I'm gonna put it in B. That you guys are probably yelling at me all over the place, like, that deserves an A, but, like, it's actually very close to A. I just feel like I don't want it to be too high, Next up is then you have the 1995 album, History, Past, Present, and Future, Book 1. Now, this is technically a compilation. You have, on disc 1, you have some of Michael's greatest hits, from the first 4 albums of his career, and then on the second disc you have another disc of, believe it was 13 whole new tracks. Some of the notable ones on here, you had the number one hit Earth Song. You had, again, another number one hit, You're Not Alone, one of the most iconic songs of Michael's entire career. You had Scream, which was the first collaboration between Michael and his sister Janet. So this album, I'm also split with, because, if you listen to it all in all, you had all of the greatest hits, and then on top of that, you had some new stuff, and the new stuff was solid. But it's not an S tier. I'm going with A. Just because, there's a lot more, better tracks on here, I have to say. Had more number one hits than Dangerous, and also was released in, I believe, 1995, and there weren't necessarily, there was still stuff going on about Michael Jackson, but it wasn't as much when Dangerous came out, so that's why I put it up there. Next, Michael's final studio album when he was alive, Invincible. Invincible is just, I'm crossed with Invincible. Invincible is known by most people as probably the worst Michael Jackson album he ever made. It was very much a disappointment. You had, the only number one hit song you had on there was You Rock My World, which I guess was Michael's comeback song after not releasing a song or album for about 6-7 years. Before I go any further, Blood on the Dance Floor does not count for this. That was just like an EP or a mixtape of just some Michael randomly released in 1997. It wasn't necessarily one of his studio albums, so let me just get that out of the way. Now, Invincible, outside of You Rock My World, there's really not much on here that really makes you think, like, oh, this is a really good album. You had some decent tracks, but nothing, like, amazing that stood out to you. So I don't want to talk about this album that much, just because it's probably one of my least favorite Michael Jackson albums, honestly. So I'm going to put it in D for now. So that seems like a good fit for it, because It's not an F because it did have the number one hit, You Rock My World, but You Rock My World is not an amazing song that it can carry it up to a C or a B. I'm just saying. Next, we have the 2010 album Michael. Now, this album was released exactly 1 year after Michael Jackson's death in 2009, and so it's the first posthumous release. And this album is probably my least favorite Michael Jackson album. This song barely had any hits on it. There's barely anything that you would know off this album unless you were a diehard Michael Jackson album. There's no like number one hits off of it. There's no like top 10 hits off of this that you would necessarily know. There is a good song on it called Behind the Mask, but that can't carry the entire album, you know? So I'd say it's either a D or an F, but no Michael Jackson album, to be honest, deserves an F. So I'm going to put it in D for now. And finally, the latest posthumous release from Michael Jackson, you had the album XSCAPE, released in 2014. Now, this album was definitely better than Michael. It definitely had a lot more hits on this album. You had what became the, I believe, a number one hit, Love Never Felt So Good, a collaboration of him and Justin Timberlake. That made it to number one also with the accompanying music video of Justin and a bunch of old Michael videos combined together. On this album, you also had the track Slave to the Rhythm, which inspired the Michael Jackson holograph that appeared at the 2015 Billboard Awards. And all around, this album is just really, really good. It's definitely better than Michael, let me just tell you. With a lot of the hits on it, it's not an S tier or an A tier. I'm thinking around maybe the C category. It's not dangerous, but it's not Michael, if you know what I'm saying. So there you go. That's my Michael Jackson tier list. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you agree, if you disagree, let me know in the comments down below, and I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.